I'm a sibling in crime. And as mentioned, the title of my talk is Becoming an Author Has No Expiration Date, about my experiences starting to write later in life and writing about older characters. So let's get a feel for the group here. How many of you here are retired? Okay. How many of you plan to retire? How many of you are having so much fun you'll never retire? Okay, we got it all covered. So let me tell you a retirement story. A wife says to her retired husband, "What you doing today?" He replies, "Nothing." She says, "That's what you did yesterday." He replies again, "I wasn't finished." So that I wouldn't retire into doing nothing, I retired into writing. Now, since a lot of my writing is about older characters, I like collecting stories about interesting older people. So I'll share a few of those with you. Hiroshi Hoketsu was the oldest competitor at the 2012 Summer Olympic Games in London. At the age of 71, he competed in dressage, an event with horses. Now, he wanted to compete in future Olympics, but his horse was getting too old. Classical guitarist Andre Segovia was asked when he was in his 80s why he still practiced 3 hours a day. His response, "I'm beginning to notice a little improvement." Genevieve Johnson was in the class of 1936 at the Westford Academy in Massachusetts, but had to drop out of high school because of the Depression. She needed to work to help support her family. 78 years later, in May of 2014, she finally got her high school diploma at the age of 94. Herman Wouk published his book, The Lawgiver, in 2012 at the age of 97. Now, I live in Lakewood, down the road here, and there's a Lakewood resident named Eileen Cooper. Eileen has written over 7,000 letters over the last 70 years to members of the United States military to thank them for their service. She turned 100 years of age last year. Buster Martin claimed to be the oldest person to ever complete the London Marathon, which he did in 2012 at the age of 101. But there's a little debate about Buster's age. At the time, he may only have been 94. Now, at the 2017 Los Angeles Times Festival of Books, Maury Markoff was there signing the very first book he'd ever written, ever published. It had come out in early 2017, and it was titled Keep Breathing. It's his memoir. At the time, Maury was 103 years old. Now, how many of you have played golf? Show of hands. Okay? A few of you. How many of you have hit a hole in one? All right, one of you. For the rest of you, there's still hope. In December of 2014, in Sarasota, Florida, Gus Andreoni hit a hole in one at the age of 103. And finally, a 104-year-old woman was interviewed and asked what she liked best about being 104 years old. Her response, no peer pressure. Now, I like collecting bumper stickers about aging, so here are a few I'll share with you. First one, young at heart, slightly older in other places. Be nice to your kids, they choose your nursing home. I believe in death after life. And finally, never have a heart attack while you're playing charades. You had to think for a minute on that one. So, how can you tell you're getting older? Well, you know you're getting older when your back goes out more than you do. You know you're getting older when you find your favorite childhood toys in antique stores. You know you're getting older when you stop lying about your age and start bragging about it. You know you're getting older when a policeman pulls you over and you ask for a senior discount. And finally, you know you're getting older when your spouse says you're hot. It's because you're using a heating pad. Now, one time after a presentation, a gentleman came up to me and handed me a folded sheet of paper and explained that he liked grading talks, and he had a grade for me. So I unfolded it and did a double take when I saw a great big 0. I thought I'd given it a pretty good talk, so I said, well, tell me a little bit about your grading system. Well, he smiled at me and said, well, what I like doing is counting the number of ums and ahs. You had 0, good job. So you never know what to expect. So let's talk a little bit about retirement. If you go back 100 years, there was no such thing as retirement. People just worked until they died. But by the middle of the 20th century, retirement became a time to kick back and relax because of Social Security and many organizations providing pensions. But the operative concept in the 21st century is finding something to retire into. So let me tell you about my own experience with retirement. And this goes back to 2001 when I was 56 years old. It's a specific evening I remember very well. I was sitting in the easy chair in my living room, and I was thinking back over things I really enjoyed doing over my life. It included building model airplanes when I was a kid. How many of you built model airplanes? Good number of you. Other things I'd enjoyed was writing and painting. Common denominator was they were all creative. And then I started looking ahead to what I wanted to do when I retired. And it was that evening I made the decision that I wanted to prepare myself to retire into writing. Now, I wasn't that good an English student in high school and college, but over a 39-year business career, I learned how to put a sentence together. And you might even say I learned a little bit about fiction writing because I used to write press releases. Now, at the time I made this decision to retire into writing and get prepared for it, my wife and I were living in Boulder, Colorado, where the University of Colorado is located. And I'd learned that if you're 55 or older, you can take any course for free at the University of Colorado with the instructor's permission. So I availed myself of this, and for 2 semesters, I took fiction writing courses at the University of Colorado to jumpstart my writing. And in this course, we wrote short stories and critiqued each other's writing. So next, I decided I want to get some of these stories published. So I began sending them off to magazines and anthologies. And I'm happy to report that on my 112th submission, I sold my first story called Never Trust a Poisoned Dart Frog, in a publication titled Who Died in Here, which was a collection of short stories that had either a death or a murder taking place in the bathroom. Now, my experience is not all that unusual. Let me tell you about some famous authors. How many of you have read Dr. Seuss stories to kids and grandkids? Okay, just about everybody. His very first one, and to think I saw it on Mulberry Street, was rejected 27 times. One of the rejections stated too different from other juveniles on the market to warrant its selling. The Diary of Anne Frank. The girl has no special perception or feeling that would lift this above the curiosity level. Now, here's one of my favorites. How many of you have read Tony Hillerman mysteries? Okay? They're set in Indian reservations in the Southwest. His very first one, The Blessing Way, was rejected with this statement. If you insist on rewriting this, get rid of that Indian stuff. Lady Chatterley's Lover by D.H. Lawrence. For your own good, do not publish this book. And finally, The Animal Farm by George Orwell. It's impossible to sell animal stories in the USA. Now, let me give you some specific rejections received by some well-known authors. Agatha Christie's very first book, The Mysterious Affair at Styles, was rejected with this statement. It's interesting and has several good points, but it's not quite suitable for our list. Almost 100 years later, I've had several rejections using almost that same phrase of not being suitable for the publisher's list. These are the types of things that we run into as we are dealing with this whole world of publishing. And one of the other ones I get a kick out of is that we often are looking for new things to put in front of readers, and it's not always accepted. And authors also have to put up with rotten reviews. So here's a couple that I find intriguing. The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. A little soft, a little slack, more than a little artificial. It falls in the class of negligible novels. On the Road by Jack Kerouac. He slips from magniloquent hysteria into sentimental bathhouse, and at his worst, really slobbers words. How'd you like a review like that? And finally, I'd like to say that John le Carré, The Spy Who Came In From the Cold, and this was rejected by a statement, this was a rotten review that said, Le Carré has no future. So, you just never know what's going to come out when these types of statements are put out. Now, when I deal with rejection and adversity, I've discovered that there are 4 alternatives. The first is that I can change my attitude. The second is I can change the situation. The third is I can suffer. And the fourth is I can get out, in other words, quit. Now, I can assure you that I suffered at least momentarily with each of the 111 rejections. But I decided not to wallow in my misery, and I was not about to give up. So I used a combination of changing my attitude to one of perseverance and changed the situation by improving my writing. Now, looking at changing attitude, there's a wonderful book called Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. How many of you have read that? Okay, a number of you. I highly recommend it. It's an excellent book. Frankl was in a concentration camp in Europe during World War II. And the thing he learned is, although the Nazis had complete control over his physical existence, when he ate, when he slept, whether he lived or died, the one thing they could not control was his attitude. Even in that horrible situation, he learned that he was master of his own attitude. A similar experience was that of Admiral James Stockdale, who was a prisoner of war during the Vietnam War. He came up with what's known as the Stockdale paradox, which is when we're in a horrific situation, we must have faith in a positive outcome and do everything possible to make that happen, while at the same time being brutally honest about how difficult our situation is. Now, looking at changing the situation, I'm reminded of author Cindy Myers. Cindy has over 50 published books, and a while back she had 2 manuscripts that she had a lot of confidence in, but felt her agent was not actively trying to sell to publishers. So she fired her agent, decided she'd go directly to the publishers herself. Within 2 weeks, she sold both manuscripts. I had a similar experience. I was with a literary agency for almost 3 years. During that time, they sold exactly 0 contracts. On my own, I've sold 41 contracts. So people in all walks of life face adversity and rejection. You're not in the big leagues unless you have at least 100 rejections. And if I had quit after 111 rejections, I wouldn't be standing here today, and I wouldn't have any published books. But as stated in the Stockdale paradox, we have to be brutally honest about how hard writing is and how difficult it is to get published. As an example, I was at a writers' conference a few years ago, and a literary agent described how her agency in 1 year had received over 36,000 query letters from aspiring writers. Out of these, they signed exactly 7 new authors, less than 1 in 5,000, or less than 0.02%. Now, I don't want to harp on all the negatives because clearly there are positives about writing. So I'll share with you a couple reviews that I've got a kick out of. One is from Publishers Weekly saying, "The story's endearing zaniness keeps boredom at bay." Library Journal said, "Humorous and heartbreaking." But the thing that really keeps me going are the emails I get from readers. And I'll share a few of those with you. "I read all your books and enjoyed them immensely, but even more fun was listening to my husband read them. He snorted, chuckled, and guffawed his way through them, and the idea of geezer lit tickled the pajamas out of me." This book addresses a lot of the issues that seniors face, but no one wants to talk about. I felt like I personally knew all the characters and hated for the book to end. And another one. Now, I'm only 76 years old, so it's hard to identify with these old fogies. Yet some of the symptoms are showing. For example, my buddies and I play hard tennis twice a week, and sometimes after a heated point, nobody remembers the game score. Nevertheless, your book kept me laughing many times out loud. It was a wonderful read, and I'll pass it along to all of my buddies. And finally, thank you for the joy you gave me in reading your book. Whilst I'm traveling towards the twilight zone myself, your book made me feel so good about myself that I can rest easy in the knowledge that all is not lost. So this is what keeps me motivated. So I want to mention a couple other things about